In today's video, you're going to learn how to create this texture effect on Photoshop. We're going to turn this portrait image into this. First, you'll learn how to create the patterns on Photoshop. We can create anything from wavy patterns to triangular patterns. Then we'll take these textures and apply them to any type of portrait images on Photoshop. So all the images that we'll use will be in the description below. And if you have any questions about any of the steps that we'll take, make sure you comment down below. And also hit that like button and hit the notification bell and the subscribe button if you haven't already. So let's get started. So to create this effect, first we need to create the textures on Photoshop. So I'm here on Photoshop and I'm going to click on Create New. And first we're going to create a really small document to create some patterns. So the first document is just going to be 10 pixels by 10 pixels. So just type in 10 and make sure it's on pixels. And the resolution should be 72 pixels per inch. And the color mode should be on RGB and 8-bit is fine. And the background can be white, and just leave all the advanced options as it is. Then just click on Create, and this is a really small document, so we need to zoom in. So choose the zoom icon right here, and let's zoom right in. So depending on what version of Photoshop you're using, you can see like the number of pixels right there. So it's just 10 by 10. So we're going to create some different types of patterns. So let's start with the first one. So go to the selection tool on the top left hand corner, and we're just going to draw a line in the middle. So just in the middle two lines there. Just click and drag. So if you just click on the first box right here and just click and drag right here, you'll have this little selection. Then let's go to the layers panel. So if you don't see this layers panel, just go to Windows and click on layers right here. So on the layers panel, just click on create new layer. So there's this new icon right next to the bin icon. And I'm just going to name this 1. So that's pattern 1. Then choose the paint bucket and choose a black color and just paint it in black. So then to deselect the selection, just press Ctrl D or Command D if you're on a Mac, and you can also just go select and click on deselect. So this is the first pattern we're going to create. So it's going to be dark in the middle and it's going to get lighter towards the top and the bottom. So to create that effect, choose the layer 1 and go into filter, go to blur and click on Gaussian blur. So it depends, when you move this little marker right here, the further you move it, the lighter it gets and the more it spreads. And if you move it all the way back to 0, it's just going to stay normal. So you need to find the exact right spot. Usually it's about here, I think. So I don't want to make it too dark or too light. So right about 1.1 is pretty good, I think. But let's just try 1.2. I think 1.2 is pretty good. So you need to kind of play around with it to get the exact kind of effect that you're looking for. So 1.2 is pretty good. So you can also just type in 1.2 there and click on OK. So this is a bit too light now. So we kind of lost the dark black color that we kind of need. So to get that back, I'm just going to copy and paste this over and over again. So get the layer 1 layer right here and just click and drag it into the new layer icon. So that just creates another layer on top of it. So you can see one copy. So you can create as many copies as you want and get it to as dark as you want as well. So I think that's dark enough right there. So about 6 copies of it makes it quite dark. So now I want to merge all of those layers together into one layer. So choose the layer right at the top and scroll down and press and hold Shift and choose the layer right at the bottom. So that's layer 1 all the way up to 1 copy 5, which is all the copies. So now if you press and hold Shift and select all those layers, then press Ctrl E, or you can also go edit, layer, and then go down to merge layer. That should be right here, merge down. Or you can even click on merge visible as well. But I usually just use the keyboard shortcuts like Command E to merge the layers, or Control E if you're on Windows, just because it makes things a lot easier. So that's our first pattern. So to create a pattern out of this, we're going to go into Edit and we're going to click on Define Pattern. So you can name it anything you want. I'm just going to name it Dark Middle because it's dark in the middle. There we go, and just click on OK. And that's our first pattern. And let's create another pattern. So you can get as creative as you want with this, and I'm just going to show you one more example of a pattern. Let's again go to the selection tool, and before that I'm actually going to create a new layer, and let's go into the selection tool again, and I'm just going to click and drag and just draw a rectangle halfway across the square. Then I'm going to choose the paint bucket tool and just paint it black. And let's deselect it by pressing Ctrl D or Command D. And again, I'm going to go into filter, blur. And this time I'm going to go into box blur. So last time we used Gaussian blur, this time we'll use box blur. So in box blur, just put it on number 4. So the radius should be at number 4. So if you increase it, you can see it gets lighter at the top. If you decrease it, it gets quite dark at the top. And usually the best spot is at number 4. So now click on OK. Now we're going to take this line here and just turn that into a pattern. So again, just like before, go into Edit, Define Pattern. And I'm going to say dark top because it's dark at the top. And again, you can name the pattern anything that you want. So now let's go into File and New again. And this time we're going to create a larger document. So this time I'll make it 2000 by 2000 pixels. And I'll make it 72 pixels per inch and make sure it's on grayscale 8-bit and the background color to be on white. So let's click on Create. And I'll go into Edit, Fill. So right here under Contents, choose Pattern. And then under Custom Patterns, you can choose the pattern that you just created. So let's click the dark middle pattern that we created right here and click on OK. So there it is. So now this is just the entire document filled with the pattern that we created. So just dark in the middle and gets light at the top. So that's just kind of repeated over and over again. So let's zoom out. So now you can actually use this texture as it is, but we could add some wavelengths to this. We can add some triangular wavelengths to this. So it's really up to you. So right here under background, I'm actually going to unlock this layer by clicking on this unlock icon. So we have layer 0. And we're going to go into Filter and we're going to go into Distort right here. And we're going to choose Wave. So you can see the preview right here. So there's different types of wavelengths that you can do. You can do triangular wavelengths, you can do square wavelengths. And I'm going to first choose Sine, which is like a curvy wavelength. And the best kind of pattern that you can get out of these waves are from these settings right here. So I've experimented with this a lot before, but you can play around with this if you wanted to, but usually these are the best settings. So number 5 for a number of generators, choose 5. The wavelength, the minimum should be 69 and the max is 70. The amplitude should be 169 and the max should be 170. And the scale should be 7 up and vertical down. And if you click on OK, now you can see we've got these nice looking texture patterns. So let's do that again. So I'm going to hide this layer right here. And let's open up a new layer and I'll call this one Triangle. And I'll also rename this one to Waves as well. So in the triangle layer, I'm going to go into Edit, Fill, and I'll again choose that same pattern that we used before. So just like before, and this time I'll choose Filter, Distort, Waves, and I'll choose Triangle this time. Let's see what that looks like. So that also looks pretty good. So it looks like a bunch of different tiles. So that's good. And for the next one, I will just do the same thing except for the other pattern. So I'll just rename this one to Waves to Dark Top. And I'll choose that layer, go to Edit, Fill, and I'll choose this pattern this time. Click on OK. And I'll go back to Filter, Distort, Wave, and this time I'll choose Sine, which are the waves, and there it is. That looks pretty good too. So this is the difference. So let's have a look at the waves, the other pattern. So it's a slight bit of difference there. So you can kind of get picky with which one that you want to use. So let's do one more. So I always like to create these textures just before we go into the images and start editing them. So it's just a nice bunch of like texture palettes to use before you get into the images. So let's go into edit, fill, and again choose the dark top pattern. And I'm going to go into filter, distort, waves, and I'll choose triangle this time. So that also looks pretty good. So I'm happy with that. So now we'll use these textures to start editing, kind of creating that money texture effect on Photoshop. So I'm here on pixels.com and I found some portraits to edit. So I'll leave a link to all of these images in the description below, but you can use your own portrait images and I would encourage you to do so because different images have different effects. So let's maybe try this one right here. So I'm simply just going to right click and copy the image and let's go into Photoshop. And I'm going to go File, New, and Photoshop should automatically pick up the width and the height of the image that you just copied and the color mode. So if it doesn't, just put in 1000 pixels by 1500 pixels, 72 pixels per inch, and RGB 8-bit. So let's click on Create. And to paste the image, just press Ctrl V or Command V if you're on a Mac, or just press Edit and click on Paste. So I'm actually going to zoom in to this, make this image a little bit bigger. And usually I don't scale up images on Photoshop because it decreases the resolution of the image. But in this case, we're just trying to create an effect with like a money texture effect. So it doesn't matter too much. So let's just hit enter there. And now we're going to go into the patterns. So first, let's just try the wave dark top pattern right here. So this texture right here. So let's zoom out a little bit. So I'm going to go select all. So it selects the entire document and click on edit and click on copy merged. So it just selects, when you click on copy merged, it just copies whatever you can see right now on the document. So let's go to the portrait and I'm just going to paste it right over the image. So before we actually go on any further, I'm just going to hide this layer right here. Now, and I'll also rename this to texture 1. And I'll rename this to portrait 1. So I always like to name the all of my layers just to keep things organized, because when you're actually working with like a big project, you probably have a lot of layers, and then if you're not naming your layers, you're going to get lost in all the different layers in Photoshop. So make sure you name all your layers. And let's choose this little icon right here. It's a little half circle icon right here. So click on that and choose solid color. So that just creates a new layer and it just creates a solid color right at the top. So you can choose any color you want, but I'm just going to choose a gray color. So it doesn't have to be too dark or too light, so just about in the middle. And right here under effects, I'm going to choose color. So it just turns the image black and white. Now let's turn the texture layer back on. And under the effects, I'm going to choose hard mix. So now already we've got this really cool looking effect, but we can kind of take this further now. So under portrait layer right here, I'm going to create another extra copy of it, because I always like to keep an extra copy. If we make a mistake or if we kind of edit the image too much, we can always go back to the original. So I'm just going to create an extra copy of it and hide the original one by clicking on the eye icon right here. So now let's choose portrait 1 copy, and I'm going to go back to this half circle icon right here and choose selective color. So you should see this properties panel right here. If you don't see the properties panel, just go to Windows and click on properties right here. So under properties, choose neutrals. So you can choose which color from the image you want to edit. So it can be reds, it could be greens. If you have an image that has a lot of greens, then you can choose greens. But I'm just going to choose neutrals, which edits all of the colors in the image. So now all you need to do is kind of play around with all of these different colors. So you can increase the black. So that might be a bit too much. So let's just zoom in a little bit so we can kind of see it a bit more. There we go. And let's play with the magenta, the cyans. So these are some nice looking cool effects already. And let's maybe make it a little bit wider. So that looks pretty cool. So let's zoom out. That's probably a bit too light now. So around there, that looks pretty good. So another thing I want to do is also kind of get rid of that background. So I think that background is kind of distracting the subject. So what we can do, I should have actually done this before, so my mistake there. So I'm just going to hide all of these layers, so all the textures and everything, and go back to the original copy. And I'm just going to choose the select tool and then click on select and mask. And if you want a detailed video on how to cut out backgrounds, I'll leave a link to another video in the description below. It's a video I made recently on how to cut out complex backgrounds. So now right here, just choose this and click on select subject. So Photoshop will just go through the image, and it's kind of like an AI, and it will actually pick up the subject of the image. So now just click on OK. Usually I would kind of make it a bit more refined around the edges and all of that, but we're just kind of putting a texture over it. So it doesn't really matter too much for the type of effect that we're going for. Then just click on mask, and that will just hide the background instead of deleting it. So masking will hide something instead of deleting it. So if you make a mistake, we can go back to it. So that's the masking icon right here. So now let's turn all of those layers back on. And you can see now that's much better. So now let's go back to selective color again right here and play around with those effects. And I think that looks way better now. So let's just zoom out a little bit. So when you zoom out, you can see the effect kind of changes here and there. And sometimes what I also like to do is just, if you press, I like to put like a black outline just kind of going around it, kind of defines the image just a little bit more. So if you press and hold Control and select the masking box right here under the image, that just creates, it just selects everything within that box. So we have like an outline of the image. So now create another layer, and I'm just going to rename this to black outline. Black outline. And I'll just paint it in black. And I'm going to keep that selection and go into select, modify, and I'm going to contract that selection. So I want to contract that selection by about, let's just say 12 pixels. So that might be a bit too much. So you can see what happened. It just, the selection went from here to here, but that might be a bit too much. So I'm going to undo that by pressing Control Z. And let's go back to select again and modify and contract. And this time I'll type in 6. So that might be just the right amount. So now we've just contracted that selection. Now just hit delete and press deselect by pressing Control D. Now you can see that nice outline just around it. So I actually don't like that outline. So it didn't come out as nice as I was expecting it to. So let's just hide that. So that's one portrait image. Now you can do this with as many portrait images as you want. So there's things that you can get really creative with. So you can maybe flip the texture around a little bit. So you can kind of flip it just about there. So I think that looks pretty good there. Maybe you could also try the other textures that we tried out. Just do the same thing. Just copy and then paste it on top of it. And then you can try the triangular ones, you can try the dark top or the dark middle ones, and different effects have different outcomes. So there's one more thing I want to try. So go back to the portrait image right here and just create an extra copy of it. And we're going to go into, so choose the extra copy layer, go to image, adjustments, and choose threshold. So that should be right here. I'm just going to kind of play around with this, kind of make it a little bit darker and hit OK. And I'm going to put this, make this a little bit lighter. So now you can see before it was like this, now it was like this. So that just kind of defines the image just a little bit more. So you can kind of play around with this a little bit more. You can play around with the threshold, or you might have to play around with the selective color. It really depends on the image that you're using. So different images have different outcomes. So you need to maybe try a different texture, maybe try a different pattern with the original patterns that we were creating here. And you can get really creative with this and come up with some really nice looking effects. And on some images, the outlines look better. On some images, the outlines don't look good. So on this one, the outline just didn't look that great. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, you can comment down below so you can see when I zoom in, it actually looks really nice, much nicer now. And if you have any questions, make sure you comment down below. Also, make sure you hit that like button and hit the subscribe button. It really helps this channel grow. And I'll see you in the next video.